We don't do that. Right? I'm like, that sounds totally. I'm like, that sounds more of like a group sport. I'd rather get my shirt cut. I don't want to get water dumped on me.
Yeah. A bucket of confetti, okay, but not.
Yeah, I was like, that's aggressive. So today it's gonna be a little bit more casual, not like less presentation based, because we're talking about maneuvers, which you've obviously done maneuvers. You've been doing maneuvers.
Mm-hmm.
Have you been flying a little bit? Okay. Well, you're going to be doing more maneuvers, so this will be useful. Because there's a certain amount of understanding that you have to have behind each maneuver that you're doing. You need to know why you're doing it, why it's useful for you, and also there's usually like some aerodynamic concepts behind it. So first one I was going to talk about was slow flight, because that's usually the first maneuver that people learn. And we use slow flight anytime we're coming into land. So every approach to landing that you do, you're in slow flight. And why it's important to do it at altitude versus on a landing close to the ground is because slow flight puts you just above stall speed. So you're kind of in a, there's less room for error is where you're at. The margin between your current speed and stall speed is very small. And an abrupt movement can end up stalling the plane. And if you do that close to the ground, could you recover? Sure. If you're 500 feet from the ground and you're, new private pilot, new student pilot, probably not. So we teach slow flight so you don't get into a stall on accident on your approach to landing phase of flight. And also just how the plane behaves when you're at a slower airspeed. You'll notice that the flight controls are a lot less effective. And I do this demonstration with students as we get in slow flight. I will like all the way left, all the way right with the ailerons. There's not a lot of movement. The plane kind of just does this. Whereas if you were flying faster, the plane, would go a lot crazier because you have a lot more airflow at a faster speed. So therefore the control surfaces are more effective. But at a slow airspeed, the control surfaces aren't very effective, especially the ailerons. So you have three primary control surfaces. You have the ailerons, the rudder, and the elevator. And they stall in alphabetical order. So ailerons stall first, elevator stalls second, rudder stalls last. And ailerons are the smallest control surface, and then the elevator, and then the rudder. So in slow flight, the ailerons are the least effective because they're small. Elevator, still pretty effective, but not quite. And then the rudder is the most effective thing you still have in slow flight because it's so big. So when you're in slow flight, there are some aerodynamics that the ACS wants you to know. So you have the relationship between angle of attack, airspeed, load factor, power setting, airplane weight and center of gravity, airplane attitude, and yaw effects. So if we're talking about angle of attack, do you guys remember what that is? Talked about it.
It's when you're not getting sufficient airflow over the wings, correct?
So that's when you exceed the critical angle of attack.
Okay.
Yes.
Is it like where you're going? It's like you're angled at one place, but you're going a different angle.
You're
So
on
it's
there.
like the
Correct. So you got the chord line of the wing. So this is like the side profile of a wing. It's called the camber. There's a chord line, which is an imaginary line between the leading edge and the trailing edge. And then Cameron, you were talking a little bit about relative wind. So you have the relative wind and you have the chord line, and then you have the angle between the two. That's your angle of attack. So relative wind is just the wind that's coming directly the opposite direction of where you're moving. And then chord line, we talked about that. So you have the angle of attack, which is the angle between the two. And we don't have an angle of attack indicator in either plane that we fly. Some planes do, so I don't know about Neshri. Some planes do, and you'll know if they do because it'll be like, they have different ones, but there's usually a little mounted piece of equipment, and it's like a black little box, and it has like red arrows, orange arrows, and green arrows. So if you're in green arrows, that means you're good, your angle of attack is fine. Once it gets into the red, that's usually mean like you're about to stall. And it looks like on the outside of the plane, it looks like you have another pitot tube. So if you come across a plane with 2 pitot tubes, one of those is an angle of attack indicator. It'll be the one, usually pitot tube's on the left, so the angle of attack indicator will be on the right. We don't have one of those, so at any given point, we don't necessarily know what angle of attack we're at. But what is important is when the stall indications start going off. So in the Cessna, the stall horn will go off, the airplane will start buffeting, so it'll start shaking. In the Piper, we don't have a stall horn, but we have a stall light on the left side of the panel, so a red light turns on once you're about to exceed the critical angle of attack and you're gonna stall. So there's the angle of attack. Some things to know about it is if you're flying at a slower airspeed, like in slow flight, you need to increase your angle of attack in order to maintain altitude because you're going so slow. If you're in slow flight, you'll probably be in landing configuration, so you'll probably be full flaps. If you had a retractable gear airplane, you would have gear down. Our gear's always down. And you'd be at a slower airspeed. The plane would want to start descending. So you'll most likely have to add power and keep a higher angle of attack. Higher angle of attack means more lift. Lower angle of attack means less lift. It's important to know that you can stall at any airspeed, any altitude, any configuration, but you'll always stall when you exceed the critical angle of attack. That's when you stall. And you can stall in a nosedive as well. So some people think, oh, I can only stall if I'm pitching up and if I'm super slow. You can stall going 100 knots in nosedive too. Because once you're in a nosedive, let's just say your wings like that, there's your port line, your relative wind now is right here. And if you just pitch up, suddenly the relative wind is all still down here, and that airflow, there's no way it can get over the airfoil, the camber. So you can stall that way as well. So let's see, anything else? Does anyone else have any notes on slow flight? Anything you guys have read or watched? Anyone want to chime in about
My
it?
instructor, the way that he taught it was like 5 steps.
Mm-hmm.
So, let me see if he said that, the slow flight is like, okay, it's basically kind of the same thing as you're preparing for landing. And he did it he's like, you do hard heat, power back, you slow down, but don't go down.
Right.
Do speed checks, flaps 10 degrees, flaps full, and you catch the airspeed with power.
Yeah.
And at 60 miles per hour.
Yeah. No, that's great. I like that he puts in airspeed checks because when you're entering maneuvers, you don't want to rush into it because you could just get unstable very quickly. So in terms of talking about like the process and the steps of getting into slow flight, yeah, you're just configuring to land. So by saying that, my intention is to make it easier. Because once you're landing the plane, you're learning how to land the plane, getting into slow flight is a little bit easier because now you're like, oh, it's the same steps. So in the 150, for example, I'll slow down to 2,000, I'll get flaps down to 10. Level out, make sure I'm not descending or climbing. And my airspeed should be bleeding off, but it shouldn't be like really fast. It should just be slowly deteriorating, very stable, giving me a chance to catch up with everything. So I'm at power 2,000, flaps are 10, making sure I'm still on my heading at my altitude, airspeed's bleeding off. And then you want to put flaps in incrementally. You never want to just drop all of them at once because that is just a really rapid change. And it just doesn't show good airmanship, airwomanship, airpersonship. So you'll be at power 2,000, and then once you get to flaps 20 to 30, you might have to add a little bit of power back in because once you have flaps 20, 30, now you have more drag than you have lift. So the plane's like starting to descend on its own. And you could totally pitch up and just change your angle of attack and maintain lift that way. However, when you're in slow flight, now you're in the region of reverse command. So now you're, instead of powering for airspeed and pitching for altitude, now it's pitch for airspeed, power for altitude. So if you're descending in slow flight, you need to add more power. If you're descending, not on purpose. So you'll power for altitude, pitch for airspeed. So your airspeed's bleeding off, but you're also descending. Okay, add some power to maintain that altitude. Now you're at flaps, let's just say 30, and your power is probably around 2300 RPM. Once you go flaps 40, you're still gonna have to increase the pitch. So I always tell students play with the trim, trim for nose up. And you're at flaps 40. Honestly, in the 150 on a warm day, you might need to almost be at full power to maintain altitude in slow flight, because it just doesn't have a lot of horsepower. So you're pretty much doing slow flight at full power with flaps 40 in the 150. And you have a higher angle of attack to maintain that altitude as well, and to maintain your airspeed. And then in slow flight, you'll probably be asked to do some banks, some turns. So you don't want to do nothing more than 10 degrees of bank in slow flight, because what ends up happening in slow flight, or in turns I should say, does anyone know what I'm about to say? What happens in a turn to your lift? I'll do my best to draw this. Here's I'm doing it in a Cessna because it's really the only thing I kind of know how to draw. There's the Cessna and the turn. Does anyone know what I'm about to say with lift? What happens with
I
lift?
know the G's increase.
Correct, for sure. The G's increase. So here's where your vertical lift used to be. Here's where it is now. So you lose a little bit of vertical lift in exchange for some horizontal lift. That's what pulls you into the turn. So because you're losing some vertical lift, the nose in a bank wants to drop. And also in a turn, yes, your G's increase. It's not super noticeable until you're like in a 30, 45 degree bank that is a little bit more noticeable. But when your G's increase, another way of saying that is your load factor increases. So load factor is just like a way we measure how much stress is on the plane. So with load factor increasing, it's almost like the plane weighs more. So at a fat or a higher weight, higher load factor, your stall speed increases. When I say stall speed increases, I mean you're gonna stall earlier than you normally would if you were not in a bank. So in slow flight, you have to worry about an increased load factor and a faster stall speed, and you have to worry about losing some of your vertical lift for horizontal lift. That's why the nose wants to drop. So in slow flight, your margin between stall speeds already very small. Last thing you want to do is increase it too much by banking too much and increasing your load factor. So very shallow banks in slow flight. And that's what the examiner and what anyone asking you to do a turn in slow flight is gonna expect from you, is that you understand aerodynamically what will happen. So you're like, I'm in slow flight, I have a small margin of error, very shallow banks. You also could be asked to do slow flight climbs and descents. Descents are, I feel like, easier than climbs because all you have to do is really pitch down and then back out the power. You're gonna have to pitch down, which will increase your airspeed. So by backing out the power, it helps you lose altitude without increasing airspeed. Because normally that's what happens. Normally we don't really care. Normally in like a basic stable descent, getting into our airport, we're descending and we pick up some airspeed. As long as we're not going into like the yellow arc or into the red line, we're okay with that. We're okay with faster airspeed, especially if we're trying to get somewhere. But in slow flight, the goal is to maintain, I think it's plus 10 minus 0 knots on airspeed. Yeah, plus 10 minus 0. So if you get into slow flight, which is 5 to 10 knots above stall speed, so in the Cessna we use miles per hour. In the Cessna it stalls around, with full flaps, no bank, it's like 48 miles per hour. So I usually have students hold between 55, like around 55 miles per hour. So if you're aiming 55 miles per hour, your climbs and descents have to be no more than 65, no less than 55. So if I'm in slow flight, let's say I'm at full power because I have full flaps in, I want to come down and descend and maintain that speed. I'll usually power back to 2,000 again, and then just pitch down. And it doesn't specify that you have to descend at a 500 feet per minute descent. You really just have to maintain your speed. So, in slow flight, if you're descending at 200 feet per minute, that's fine. As long as you're maintaining plus 10 minus 0 on your airspeed and you are established in the descent. Climbs are a lot harder. Most climbs are going to have to be at full power because in a climb, if you pitch up, usually your airspeed decreases. And technically, you don't have a margin to go below your current speed. So if anything, if I were to climb in slow flight, maybe I was holding 55, I'm gonna actually use that margin of 10 plus knots or miles per hour. I'm gonna climb at 60. Yes, I'm deviating from my slow flight speed, but I at least now have 5 knots or 5 miles per hour behind me and in front of me to, you know, not bust a checkride, for example. So I'll climb a little bit faster. And again, it doesn't have to be 500 feet per minute climb in slow flight. Honestly, I don't think the Cessna would even do that. So if it's 100 feet per minute, 200 feet per minute, it's gonna be really slow, but it is a climb. And all it says is you have to establish a climb and maintain that speed. And just the way the planes perform, yeah, of course it doesn't want to climb when you have 40 degrees of flaps in. So you can't expect it to do 500 feet per minute. So be patient. Be patient with your climbs and descents. Be patient with the banks. In terms of weight, I know in the Cessna, all of the speeds and like the stall speeds are based off of max gross weight. So obviously if you're, I shouldn't say obviously, but if you're lower than max gross weight, your stall speed's actually gonna be lower, which is a good thing. It means you don't stall quite as quickly as you would. But because the POH doesn't offer us any other information, we just use the max gross weight stall speeds. And it'll actually be safer that way because max gross weight stalls at 48. If you're not at max gross weight, it probably stalls like, I don't know, 45, 46. Use 48. It'll keep you above stall speed. And that's what you want. That's where you want to be. So, slow flight, you should not hear the stall horn. That, in not the previous ACS, but the one before that, so like 2 editions ago, they had private pilots performing slow flight with the stall horn in the background, just going. But what happened is now that kind of encouraged, it like shifted the mindset in a negative way to where pilots were like not alarmed by hearing the stall horn, which the stall horn's a warning. It's not that you're stalled, but it's like, hey, you're gonna stall if you don't fix something. But by training them that way, they were like, oh, it's just a stall horn, like who cares? And that's not the mindset we want. We want, if you hear the stall horn, push forward, react, you know, recover quickly. Yes.
I was curious. So would you be saying this on a check ride, like explaining this, because like, or else they wouldn't know for sure if that's like what you're shooting for, right?
Right. So what they could be asking you, they're going to expect you to be familiar with the stall speeds, maybe not memorized to the T, because it changes based on like your bank and how many flaps you have in, but you should know where to find it in the POH, because they could be like, well, what's your stall speed in a 20-degree bank with flaps 30? I don't have that memorized, but I know where to find it. And you can be like, you know what, that's a great question. I want to say it's, I don't know. I don't even know what it would be. I want to say it's 46 miles per hour, but I'm going to look that up in the POH. I'm like, okay. You should have an idea, like a roundabout. You know, I can tell you with flaps up in 0 degrees, it's between like 49 and 48 miles per hour. If I wanted to give you the exact number, I can tell you exactly where to find it in the POH. So you should know where to find it. And in terms of like what would they ask you aerodynamically, in slow flight they could be like, so why do we teach slow flight? And you can be like, well, it's because on an approach to landing I'm in slow flight. So knowing how the plane behaves will keep me safe in the traffic pattern when I'm landing.
Okay. But how would they gauge if you bust in a slow flight if they don't know what you're going off of?
Well, they'll know the parameters.
So they'll know it all.
Yeah, so if you're like, let's see, what's one of them? If you're trying to maintain a specified altitude of plus or minus 100 feet. So if he or she, the examiner, is saying, I want you to maintain straight and level in slow flight. If you start descending or climbing, then they're gonna be like, okay, that's past 100 feet, you know?
Yeah.
If you are descending, then we don't use that parameter. It's really just like, okay, you're descending, as long as you're descending.
But so they're going off of the POH for the slow flight parameters
For like the speeds.
for the speeds.
Yes, they're
That's
gonna
what
want
I'm
to know.
wondering.
Yes, yeah, they're gonna want to know like, hey, what are the stall speeds for your plane?
Okay.
So that way they know like one that you're aiming for the correct speed. Because if you're like, I'm doing slow flight at 70 miles per hour, they're gonna be like, huh, that's not really. Yeah.
Okay.
So they're gonna want to know.
That's what
Yeah, and a lot of the time the examiners, because they've done so many check rides, they might already kind of know, especially if they've been in that specific plane before. They're like, okay, you know, every time I do a check ride, your guys' students hold between 55 and 60 miles per hour on slow flight, so that's what I'm looking for again.
Okay.
A lot of the time, what's nice is with examiners is they just want, they know that you know the plane, because it's probably the one you've been primarily training in. So they're gonna ask you, okay, what speed are you gonna try to hold in slow flight? And then you say, 55 miles per hour. They'll be like, okay, how did you get to that number? Well, in the POH, such and such, it says this, and it's plus or minus, it's plus 5 or 10 for slow flight. So that's how I got that number. They're like, okay. And they'll just be looking for that number. Yeah.
If they're ever wondering, they'll just ask.
Yeah, they'll
You don't
ask.
say, you don't have to be like, okay, do slow flight this way, and then you would be like, how would you
Right.
do this because of this?
Correct. Yeah, there's because everyone, I mean, slow flight's one of those things where I don't feel like there's a whole lot of different ways to teach it, but I do believe with maneuvers there are different techniques, and so there's not necessarily a right or wrong way of doing things. If it's within the standards and it's what they asked for, then cool. They might have a better way of doing it, and they're not technically supposed to teach, but a lot of them have trouble with that, and they end up teaching you anyway. They tell you actually a better way to do it would be this, but that's not your fault. That's how your CFI taught you, you know.
Okay. I was just like,
Yeah, where are these
could be
numbers?
Miscommunication.
For sure, and there totally could be, and that's why I feel like every check ride I've ever had when we do maneuvers, they're just like, what speed do you do maneuvers in this plane? And if it's like a 172, I'll be like, somewhere between 90 and 95 knots. They're like, okay. At the level that they're at, they already have a general idea of where you should be at, so they might not even ask. They might just be like, if you say 55, they're like, yeah, that sounds right. Okay. Cool. Anything else on the ACS for slow flight? A big thing, a lot of people fail for this. Before you do maneuvers, what do?
You check first. Forget what it's called. Look around you.
Correct. You clear the area.
Clear the area.
There you go. Clear the area, always. So many people fail because they forget
And
to
you're
do that.
supposed to verbally say that. Just to
Yes. For any check ride, anytime you're flying with, honestly, anybody, especially with other pilots, but even with non-pilot passengers, you should be verbalizing what you're doing and what you're thinking. Because right now, you guys are students and you're primarily flying with one person, and that's your CFI. So there's a little bit of a level of complacency that happens between you two because they know your habits, you know their behaviors, you guys have a mutual understanding and like a silent agreement. They know you're gonna clear the area. You might start to forget to verbalize that you're doing that. And then you fly with someone new, they have no idea what kind of pilot you are. They're maybe a little nervous, especially if it's an examiner. If you don't verbalize what you're doing, they have no idea because they don't know you. They don't know how you fly. They don't know your behaviors and habits. So it's up to you to reinforce the idea of like, I'm a safe pilot, and you're trying to convince them. With the examiner, your check ride, you're basically trying to convince them, hey, if you put a loved one with me in this airplane, they would be safe with me. And a lot of examiners will tell you that. They'll tell you like, I'm not gonna pass you if I wouldn't put my wife in a plane with you. I wouldn't put my child in a plane with you, I'm not gonna pass you. If I feel like I could put a family member with you and they would make it from A to B, then you've passed. That's what they're looking for. They're just making sure that you're safe. They're not looking for perfection. And a lot of the time, because you're nervous, you might bust one of the parameters, like you might drop 150 feet. You might overshoot your heading by 15 degrees. If you call it out and you fix it, 99% of the examiners will let it go. They know you're nervous, they know you're not perfect. It could be a hot day, a hot bumpy day. They might kind of expand the parameters, like they might not tell you that, but in their own minds, they're like, I know it's bumpy out here, I know there's gonna, it's gonna be a little more challenging. They're realistic and compassionate people, but you have to catch it. You have to catch the mistake and you have to fix it. If you deviate by 200 feet and you leave it there, then yeah, they're gonna fail you, because that kind of just shows like, that's 200 feet, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is like, that could be, that 100 feet extra could be the difference between you and a mountain. So if you catch the mistake and you fix it, most of the time, they're gonna let it slide. However, I do want to reiterate, if you bust, technically it's fair game for them to fail you then and there. Most of them won't if you correct it and fix it, but it is fair for them to do so. Do I agree with that? No, because you gotta factor in like you're nervous, if it's a bumpy day, all those things, but I'm not the examiner, so I can't, I can't vouch for you if you broke an ACS parameter, unfortunately. Hot weather makes maneuvers a little bit more challenging because you probably will need more power than you normally would, because the air is thinner. Not only is it hotter, but you're also at a higher altitude. So if the density altitude at McClellan on the surface is, let's say 1,000 feet, which McClellan's pretty much sea level, then when you're at 6,000, or let's say you're at 4,500, then really the plane's at 5,500. So even thinner than you're used to. So you're probably gonna have to use more power than how you normally would, because now the plane needs to travel faster to get the same amount of air molecules in order to read the same airspeeds. So you might be like, normally I'm at 2,300 RPMs and I can get 90 miles per hour, but for whatever reason it's only at 80. You might need to be at 2,500 RPM to get to 90 miles per hour, because there's less air up there, there's less air molecules going into the pitot tube. All the pitot tube is doing is measuring a difference in pressure. So if the pressure is less and the air molecules are farther apart, it's measuring the pressure, but it's just not what you're used to because it's hot. So being aware of like, it's a hot day, I'm trying to do slow flight. I usually can manage slow flight with full flaps at 2,400 RPM. But in this case, I'm still descending. Okay, you're gonna need full power then. Another important note, yeah, so back to, I like what you said, the crack checklist. It's funny, I personally don't teach this just because it wasn't taught to me. I was taught a different acronym. All of them are fine. If I remember, so you'll have to help me. So crack is clear the area.
Clear track, yeah.
Okay, what's the R?
Reference point.
Reference point, A is altitude. Oh.
Airspeed, altitude, and configuration.
Cool. So clear the area, reference point, find the landmark. It's been pretty hazy out with all the smoke, so not a whole lot of landmarks right now. Reference point would be like Mount Diablo, because you can see that from Folsom Lake. Just, a mountain, a cloud, a building, something that you can easily see and spot. If you have a heading bug in the plane, which I don't think any of ours do, if you have a heading bug though, it'll be on the heading indicator and it's like another knob, and it depends on the instrument, but, honestly it just depends on the brand. Most of the time it's like two little orange, like forks kind of thing, and you can move it to like specify what heading you want. So you could bug a heading. Otherwise, if you don't have a heading bug and you don't have a reference point, it's like, okay, you have to just look at the heading indicator and be like, okay, I'm on a heading of 180, so I should stay on 180 plus or minus 10. So no more than 170, no more than 190 on either side. So choose your reference point. Hopefully it's outside, because really all of these maneuvers are visual. You should be outside 80% of the time with your eyes. Inside is just to make sure like you're not descending, you're not climbing, you're not too slow. So clear the area, reference point, airspeed, altitude. At or below maneuvering speed. In the Cessna, it's 109 miles per hour. In the Piper, it's 129. At or below that. The Piper, I wouldn't do maneuvers at 100 miles per hour. It's just too fast. You don't want to rush through anything. So in the Cessna, I would say like 80, 85 miles per hour is comfortable. I try to get to 90, but sometimes it's just hard. She just doesn't want to do it because she's a little old lady. So if you can get to 90, that's ideal, but 85 is fine. miles per hour in the Cessna 150. If you're in a, Sandra, I know you're in a 172, so yours is probably like 90 knots, 95 knots. In the Piper, about 90 miles per hour. I can get that pretty easily. So those are the speeds to be aiming for. Not too fast, because if you're above maneuvering speed, do we remember what happens? What maneuvering speed is? It's kind of complicated. It's VA is the little V speed.
Isn't it the speed that the recommended, is it the recommended airspeed?
It is recommended, yeah.
According to the POH that you want to be within,
You are correct. It's in the POH. It's the recommended speed for maneuvers. The reason why is because the short answer is it's the speed that the plane will stall before it brakes. So if you stall the plane in the 150 below 109 miles per hour, or if you make like an abrupt control movement that overstresses the plane's gonna stall. And it gives you a chance to recover, get out of it, and don't do that again. If you're above maneuvering speed and you make one abrupt movement, like either full back, full forward, full left, or full right, and like you do something crazy, like you do that or you do that, something's gonna break. And you can't recover from a flap flying off. So it'll stall before it brakes. The more formal definition is the speed at which you can make one abrupt control movement at which the plane will stall before it overstresses or threatens the structural integrity of the plane. So one abrupt control movement. You can do this, you can do this, you can do this or this. You cannot do this or this.
Does
One.
it have that definition? I feel like I feel like I read that.
In the 150 POH, I don't think it has a list of definitions, but if you look it up,
In the I think that has everything. That has all the terms. I think it's just in
is it one of the handbooks?
maybe it's
I
not in
found
the
it
books. I
in-
thought it was in the FAR too.
It could totally be in the FAR. In the AIM, probably, maybe, in that section.
I found it in
I think the airplane flying handbook
yeah,
talks
airplane
about
flying
it.
handbook,
might be.
yeah.
I'm not gonna find it.
No, you're fine. You're probably right. It's probably like in the AIM or something. You can find it in probably a lot of different places. Airplane flying handbook for sure. Pilot's handbook of
The
aeronautical
aeronautical,
knowledge.
yeah, the
Mhm.
aeronautical,
That has everything.
handbook,
Those ones
yeah.
are. Yeah, those are the books I can think of. That it would be in there. So VA, maneuvering speed's a big one, knowing that. Maneuvering speed, the actual speed, will be in the POH. And I think actually in both of our planes, it's actually placarded. So it's like in letters, in writing, on the panel, which is nice for reference. And most planes now have that. I think in 0172, at least in the newer models, maneuvering speed's like 105 knots. So if I had to guess, it'd be like 110 miles per hour, something like that. But yeah, so at or below maneuvering speed, so that's part of like your airspeed altitude. So back to the crack thing. Clear the area, reference point, airspeed altitude, airspeed at or below maneuvering speed, altitude, pick an altitude. But be stable. If you're, like, I have students sometimes, they'll try to start a maneuver while they're like in an unintentional descent. And it's like, whoa, like make sure you're stable and ready for the maneuver to begin. Because if you're starting at 3,500 and you start the maneuver when you're accidentally descending to 3,400, now you not only have to do the maneuver correctly, but you have to fix your altitude in the middle of that, and it's just not gonna work. So make sure you're at an altitude, you trimmed out the plane, you could let go of it, and it's flying just fine without you at that altitude. Make sure you're stable, take your time. And then configure different configurations for different maneuvers, so it depends on what you're doing. Again, with the slow flight, you're just configuring as if you were gonna land the plane. And then usually from slow flight, we get into power off stalls. So power off stalls, aka approach stalls, those are the stalls that are most likely to happen when you're on the approach to land. Specifically like on a base to final turn or just on final. Because what ends up happening a lot of the time is people on short final, they end up too low and too slow. So usually, naturally, instinctively, our main concern is like, I'm too low. I'm gonna hit something. And without thinking about it, we pull up. Well, when you pull up, you also decrease airspeed. And when you're first learning to fly, airspeed's not really at the forefront of your mind. Hitting something's more at the forefront of your mind. That makes sense. However, airspeed is really your main concern, especially in landing. So what ends up happening is you're too low, too slow, people just pull up without realizing you're in slow flight and you're in the region of reverse command. So if you're too slow, you actually need to pitch down. And if you're too low, which is your main concern apparently, you actually need to add power. So if you're too low and too slow, so if you're, let's say, in the Cessna 150, short final, no slower than like 65. If you're at 60 and you're continuing to slow down, it's full power. Carb heat off, full power. Honestly, I would go around. Just try again. If you're more experienced and you're comfortable, it's probably salvageable. But for students, I'm just like, if you're not at 65, you just go around. You know, there's no point in trying to fix something that you're not comfortable with. Just try again. Obviously, if you're with a CFI, they might just jump in and they might just fix it and they might land the plane and everything's fine. But just remember that experience levels are different and you're comfortable with that happening when you're with a CFI. But you, as a pilot, as your own independent pilot, you have to come up with your own personal minimums of like, well, if that were just me flying, I would have gone around. And as CFIs, we do our best to like leave it up to you to where like we don't jump in. Obviously, we're gonna jump in if it's like, no, this needed to be fixed like right now because it's dangerous. But you know, like with a student, I'm asking that if something's like looking wrong, I'll be like, so what do you think? Like, what are your thoughts? Are you too high? Are you too low? Are you too fast? Are you too slow? And they'll be like, I'm too low and I'm too slow. I'm like, okay, well, what would you do? And they're like, I would go around if you weren't here. Okay, pretend I'm not here. Go around. Because I'm trying not to like jump in and save it, because then naturally you're like, well, my CFI was able to save it. Like maybe I could save it. No, I don't want you to think like that. I want you to make your own decisions. And we do our best. So, you know, sometimes we jump in, maybe when we shouldn't have, but you know, it was just a reaction. So we try. But approach stalls happen usually like on short final, you're too low, too slow. You do the wrong thing, you pull up, and you're not thinking about the slow flight stuff. So we teach how to recover, and we teach how to recognize the stall, just in case it does happen to you. You don't have that instinct to pull up, you know that you're stalling, so you know to push forward. So same aerodynamics apply with the angle of attack. You stall and you see the angle of attack, critical angle of attack. In the base to final turn, you know, you're probably at a 20-degree turn, maybe 30, depending on the winds. You're increasing the load factor of the plane. And if you're slowing down and increasing the load factor at the same time, that stall speed margin is getting smaller. So by knowing how the plane behaves in slow flight, and when you're about to do a power off stall, you know in the traffic pattern, you're like, this is the danger zone right now. So you're more aware. That's all we're asking, is more situational awareness. So in terms of like turning too steep base to final, if the winds are pushing you off and you didn't correct for it in time, and maybe you overshot the runway, which means you just turned too wide and now you're here and the runway's here, go around. If you're on a 2-mile final and you're over here, you could probably correct it with, you know, minimal maneuvering. That's totally fine. But if you're on a normal traffic pattern and you're over here and you maybe have like half a mile, 3/4 of a mile to correct it, it's probably just better for you to go around and just be aware of what the wind's doing to you, and then next time maybe you turn earlier, because maybe the wind's pushing you into the turn and you can turn normal, but now you're over here. Okay, next time I'm gonna turn earlier. I'm gonna turn sooner, or next time I'm gonna come out farther and then turn earlier. And if that doesn't work, I at least have more time to come back and line back up. So the go-arounds are nice because it gives you an opportunity to realize, well, what went wrong, and what do I need to fix for this next lap around? So use go-arounds as a tool, if anything. Like if you're coming in and it's a little bit windier than you expected, just plan to go around. Just plan to do like a low approach over the runway, you know, be 200 feet above the runway, and just plan on, I'm not gonna land this time around, I'm just gonna kind of get a lay of the land and what the winds are doing, and then the next time around, I'll attempt to land. You could totally do that. You can just, you know, do a low pass. See how the wind is handling with the plane. So power off stalls, still do the crack checklist, or whatever your flow is, whatever however your CFI teaches it. Clear the area, reference point, because you're still trying to maintain a heading for the power off stalls, plus or minus 10 degrees. Sometimes they'll ask you to do it in a bank, and it'll be no more than a 20-degree bank. And if they tell you do it in a 10-degree bank, it has to be plus or minus 5 degrees. So if they gave you 10 degrees, you can be either 5 degrees or 15 degrees. Let me make sure I'm saying that right. Actually, yeah, they give you 10 degrees. So maintain a specified angle of bank not to exceed 20 degrees, plus or minus 10 if in turning flight. Okay, so they give you a 10-degree bank, technically you can be at 0 degrees and technically be okay. You're not trying to maintain an altitude because in a power off stall, you're actually in descent. You're acting like you're landing. So if it helps, you know, maybe your reference points are road. That way you can kind of treat it like a runway, or just, you know, whatever reference point you have. If it's a mountain, just be like, okay, that mountain I'm pretending is a runway. I'm heading for the runway and I'm descending. So you're configured in slow flight in a descent. So you're in a stabilized descent. You're slowing down to whatever your final approach speed usually is. In the Cessna 150, I can be over the numbers at 60 miles per hour. So I usually, at 60 miles per hour is when I cut the power. But 60, 65, whatever you want to do. So in the power off stall, you're already configured in slow flight, you're in a shallow descent, you've backed out the power, you're maybe to like 1500 RPM, slowing down, you hit 65, 60 miles per hour. You should have the carb heat on by now. If it's not, turn it on, pull on the carb heat, pull out the power, and now you pull up. And it does not have to be like this. It can be gradual. A nice smooth application of back pressure on the yoke. You're pulling up, and what are you doing? You're increasing your angle of attack. Up until the point that you exceed the critical angle of attack. And now, instead of the airflow going nice and smooth over the wing, so usually you have the air going up and over and down, I should say. Up and over and down, and then also underneath. Usually that's what it looks like. It's nice and smooth, it's attached to the wing. But in a high angle of attack, for a stall, this same wind is now becoming turbulent airflow, and it separates from the wing. So the turbulent airflow is why you get that buffeting. The plane kind of feels like it's shaking a little bit. Stall horn's going off because it's programmed to go off. I don't know the exact mechanics of it, but it has to do with pressure differential. That's why, like, you could test the stall horn if you have a little suction tool, or you could actually put your mouth on it and suck it. I would recommend doing that. I have a guy student that does it because he's tall enough and he's just like fearless and he just does that. And I'm like, I would never. If you're gonna do that, get like a napkin and put it over there and then do it. But I don't do it. I spent the $8 on the little tool because like first of all, I'm not tall enough, so I can't. That's already out of the question. But if you suck on it, or if you use a little, oh, I have it actually. This little, I don't know, it's like an accordion, little plastic tool.
It makes a horrible sound.
Yeah, it makes like, well, when you're testing it, like on pre-flight, so like, literally, if this is the little stall hole on the wing, you just put this black part over it, like that, and then I hold it there, and then I press it, and I just let it go, and it just sucks on it. And the pressure differential causes, it sounds just like a,
does it sound like a foghorn kind of? Like
Kind of. It just sounds like a squeal. It doesn't sound like the exact stall horn, because the stall horn in the plane's is like a nee, like that's what it sounds like when you're about to stall. But when you're testing it, it's more of just like a beep. I don't know how to do it. It's like rubber duck. Sounds like a rubber ducky when you're testing it. But like when you're actually flying the plane and it's going off, no, it's like a friggin' screeching noise. Like it's really hard to miss. So yeah, testing it works a little differently. So test it on your pre-flight, especially if you're gonna go do stalls. Piper doesn't have it; just has the stall light. And you test the Piper one a little differently. It has a tab, so it's kind of nice because it has a tab, and when you have the master switch on, you just put the tab up, and then the light will go on. You don't have to like get this thing out or suck on it. So you're in a descent. You wait until you slow down to your approach speed, whatever that is on short final approach. You're kind of simulating also that you're like rounding out and flaring on a landing, because sometimes people will round out too high and then they'll start flaring and they're like 10 feet above the runway, and if you stall to 10 feet above the runway, that might be pretty nasty. So that's also kind of what we're simulating, whether it's on like your base to final turn, on final where you're too low, too slow, or on the round out flare portion, you rounded out flared too high, and the stall horn's going off. So slowing down rotation speed, you power off, car beat on, pitching up, it stalls. First thing is push. And it doesn't, again, I don't think anything you do with the plane has to be aggressive. There's no flying aggressively required. The plane naturally is gonna fall. The nose is naturally gonna fall anyway. You're just helping it out. So it's very much like, if you're here, that's all the motion is. It's not like, you're not jamming it forward. It's just you're almost just like letting go. You're just letting it fall. Common error, people try to recover too quickly. They just push and jam the throttle in, and then what happens? The nose jumps right back up because you gave it full power. So yeah, now it's trying to fly again, but you didn't fully recover from the stall. So if you try to recover too fast, the horn goes off again, and you can enter a secondary stall, which just means you recovered improperly the first time. So you need to give it time. You need to give it like at least 4 seconds with 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, you've given the plane enough time to get some airspeed. Carb heat off, full power. I try to tell people, if you are able to, do those both at the same time, because the carb heat's right next to the throttle. So if you can, push them both in at the same time. If you can't, okay, full power, carb heat off. Slowly retract the flaps. So for me, it's push, full power, carb heat off, flaps up to 10. And then just focus on letting the nose climb, but gradually. It should be climbing kind of like that, instead of what it wants to do is this. Don't let it do that. So you actually kind of have to hold the yoke a little bit to prevent it from rising too fast. Once you're in a positive rate of climb and you're at least at VX or VY, whatever you want to aim for, ACS just says VX or VY, so up to you. Once you're at one of those airspeeds and you're in a positive rate of climb, you can put the flaps all the way up. But do not retract them all at once, because the plane will just sink and your recovery will become unstable and you might stall again. So retract the flaps, no more than up to 10 at first, and then just let the plane start climbing again, because it'll climb at 10, not with 10 degrees of flaps just fine. But just remember to put them up. And then you recovered. Once the VSI says 0 or indicates a climb, you've officially recovered from the stall. And you have to be on your heading plus or minus 10 degrees. And that's really the only parameter it gives you. If you're in a bank, then you have to still be in the bank plus or minus 10 degrees. And another common error is the student does not acknowledge the cues. So they just do the maneuver quietly, and then they recover. They don't say, there's the buffet, there's the horn, there's the stall. So if you're not doing that, practice that with your CFI, because what it does is it lets us know that you're recognizing those cues, because if you're quiet, I don't know, like, are you feeling the buffet? Are you hearing the stall horn? Because at first, when your students are first learning how to do stalls, a lot of the time they don't hear the stall horn at first because they're just not aware that that's a thing, and they're not used to hearing that, and they might think, oh, maybe that's just normal. It's not normal. So usually the CFI should demo the stall first and let you hear the horn, just like to get that in your brain. But you need to acknowledge it. So you need, when you're doing the maneuver, especially with the examiners, like there's the buffeting, the controls are really mushy, like they're not doing much kind of thing. There's the horn, and then if you're back here and then the nose starts dropping, it has stalled. There's the stall. Push, 1 potato, 2 potato, 3 potato, 4 potato, throttle, carb heat, flaps up to 10, let it gradually climb up to VX, VY, flaps all the way up. There was something else I wanted to say. Right rudder. Power off stall, you'll need a little bit of right rudder because of the left turning tendencies. So that's another aerodynamic part of stalls is left turning tendencies, knowing how to counteract that with right rudder. The right rudder is more prominent and more needed in the power on stall, because now with power on you have more P factor to worry about and you have more torque from the engine, so it really wants to go to the left. And of course, one of our main worries with stalls is not only could you stall, but you could spin. So a spin is just an uncoordinated stall, and it usually means you didn't put enough right rudder in. It could totally happen the other way, but most likely it'll happen because there was a lack of right rudder and it'll drop to the left. But again, it could totally happen both ways. Just most of the time to the left. So we also teach spin awareness. You're not required to do spins for private pilot. If the opportunity arises and you end up flying a plane that's allowed to do spins, I would recommend it. But you're not required. You are required, however, to be aware of it and know how to recover from it if it were to happen. So there's the acronym PARE, P-A-R-E. First thing you do is power idle. That one, it slows down the plane, because one of our concerns is like if you're in a dive with a lot of power in, you could the never exceed speed, or you could get into the yellow arc. Yellow arc is smooth air only. So if it's smooth air, you can fly in the yellow arc if you want to do. If it's turbulent, you cannot go into the yellow arc. So if it's a turbulent day and you're really fast, yeah, we don't want to be too fast. So power out helps stop the acceleration, and it also helps the plane recover. Because now you've stopped some acceleration, so the nose is able to kind of lift itself back up again. Whereas if you're going full throttle down into the ground, the plane's like, okay, I guess this is how we're flying. Power out, power idle, ailerons neutral. So the tendency is if the plane spins to the left, everybody cranks the yoke to the right. Don't do that. Let it go, if anything. Leave it neutral. Rudder opposite of the turn is the R, most likely. It'll spin to the left. You'll get out of it with right rudder. That's what's going to stop the spin. And then elevator forward, which is the counterintuitive part, because we think, well, I'm nose down, I want to come back up. You're still in a stall. You still have to recover from that stall, and how do you recover? You push forward. Elevator forward briskly. I heard a story that a student failed his check ride on the oral because he was talking about spin recovery and he said elevator forward, but he didn't add the briskly part, and the examiner failed him. I disagree with that. I don't think that is like a fail-worthy mistake. But I'm telling you now, so you don't make the mistake, just in case. So elevator forward, briskly. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like, might as well say it in a British accent, and then just whatever. It was just, I read that and I was like, man, I would have complained. And that's another point is if you feel like you were given an unfair check ride, you can complain to the Flight Standards District Office, and we do have one in Sacramento. You don't have to go there, but you can give them a call and be like, it's unfair. Like, you failed me for an unfair reason. So you can complain, because unfortunately, there are bad examiners out there. Of course, we try to give you somebody who has a good reputation, of course. So for Girls of the Fly, we mainly use Mark Montague. He's great, love him. So shouldn't run into an issue there. After you've recovered from the spin/stall, now you have to, establish a climb again. So you're power idle, you're still nose down, and you've pushed forward and you've recovered. So, and in terms of like, how do you know that you recovered? Well, if in a spin, first of all, you're not spinning anymore, so the wings are now level. And you're gaining your airspeed back. Okay, you can slowly pull back up, add a little power gradually, simultaneously, maintaining your airspeed, of course not too fast, but in the green arc. And if the VSI indicates that it's climbing again, okay, you've recovered, the plane's flying, you're good. So yeah, spin awareness is big. Power on stalls, you're gonna need a lot more right rudder for this. The setup for power on stalls is easier, or actually no, the recovery from power on stalls is easier, but the setup is a little bit harder, and it wouldn't seem that way because you don't do it with flaps, you do it clean, because you do it in takeoff configuration. So now we're pretending this is a departure stall. We've done either like a really bad go around, maybe we tried to do a go around with full flaps and we added full power and suddenly the nose is all the way up and you're in a power on stall. Or you're trying to climb, you didn't add enough power, you retracted all your flaps, and now the plane is sinking and you're pulling up and increasing the angle of attack and you stall that way. And on takeoff, yeah, go ahead.
I was just wondering, because for power off stalls, it's kind of like when you're descending, you are supposed to have like nose down attitude, but then it's kind of like, is this simulating like you see like terrain in front of you, you're like, oh, let me pull up. But then if you are still like in like a typical descending like setup, like your nose down attitude, but then you just get too slow, like you probably like you pull out your power too soon and you're just like going like 45 knots, and then what will happen? Will you just drop out of the, because like your nose up, you have a lot of room for your nose to fall down, but if you're already here, what happens if you stall?
So like if you're here and you stall,
yeah, like you're descending and you just somehow end up really slow, where does your nose go? Because it's already like down.
You still push forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
It just won't be as like Jurassic, because it's like, and when
yeah,
you're going up, it's pretty like it breaks and then like you fall.
Right, and I will say it's really, I don't think I've ever gotten the plane down to 45 knots in a nose down attitude. It's always been a situation where like the student is maybe too low and too slow, and instead of adding full power, or maybe they add just a little bit of power, but then they pitch up a lot.
So it's just more likely to stall with like user error, kind of, not so much the plane like doing stuff, but then when you're in a power on stall, it's kind of like you're supposed to pull up, but if you pull up too far, then it's kind of like that's where the stall happens.
Yeah, well, no, so in the power on stall, you're gonna pull up a lot more, just because you have more power and more speed, so you have more speed to bleed off now. Yeah, in the power off stall situation, I don't think I've ever been like in a normal descent, nose down, slowing down all the way to 45. Not saying it can't happen, but in any case, if it stalls because you're too slow, you still pitch down. Yeah, because we have to take into account, the relative wind, if we're in a descent, is here. So if you're still here and the relative wind is here, angle of attack's not high enough for you to stall. It's gonna be exceed if you pull up and do this. So I think in that situation, it's like the relative wind, it's coming at you. So only way to exceed that critical angle of attack is by pulling up. But in the power on stall, power on stall is like, it's the departure stall. We're mimicking a botched go around, or just like you're taking off and you're super distracted, and it totally happens. You wouldn't think so, because I feel like everyone thinks takeoff is easier, but it's actually because of that mindset, we become a little more complacent in takeoffs, and we don't pay attention to our airspeed as much, because we're like, well, I'm at full power, like that, so I'm have plenty of airspeed. Now what happens? People take off, they're at full power, and they're climbing, and they're trying to climb above a cloud, they're trying to climb above terrain, they're trying to avoid somebody from hitting them. You get distracted, you get caught up. It happens a lot with VFR pilots who they're taking off out of like a airport that's surrounded by fog, but the airport itself is VFR. But as they're climbing out, that fog bank gets real close really fast, and they didn't account for that. So they try to pull up, so they don't enter the clouds, but now their airspeed's bleeding off. Unfortunately, I would rather enter the clouds than stall on takeoff. Easy for me to say, because I have my instrument rating and I've done it in clouds before. But this is why we have to do hood training and simulated IMC for Private Pilot, is to give you some sort of idea of like what it's like to fly in the clouds. Obviously, like the foggles in the hood, they really do not mimic the full effect of being in the clouds, but it's the best we've got. So that's why I recommend everyone get your instrument rating. Even if you're not going career-wise, at least get your instrument rating, because it just helps a lot. It makes you a lot safer. So you're doing a takeoff and you're trying to outclimb the clouds. Well, you could do power on stall that way. And that happens a lot, unfortunately. It usually ends up being a stall spin accident. So stall spin crash. So in the power on stall, again, we're not trying to hold an altitude until, if you're setting up, yes, hold your altitude. Do your crack thing. Once you're getting ready, you still have to slow down just like you would for a power off stall, but now you're slowing down to rotation speed. So if your rotation speed, I think in the Cessna, I usually rotate at 60. So in the Cessna, we'll slow down to 60. So you back out the power. We're not using flaps though. You'll back out the power, and instead of adding flaps, you'll pitch up. And now you're in a takeoff configuration. Okay, I'm backing out the power, I'm pitching up, I'm climbing, I'm slowing down, I'm in a takeoff configuration. There's 60, no flaps. Holding your reference point, whatever that is. You need to add power. It does not have to be full power. It just has to be no less than 65% of available power. So in the 150, I think I calculated it one time. I think it ended up being like 1800 RPM with 65%. That's not much. So a lot of people think they have to do full power. You don't. And honestly, I don't like doing it with full power because it makes it, one, it takes forever to stall, and two, it makes the maneuver a little bit more squirrely and uncomfortable. So what I do is I'm usually in a power on stall to slow down. I'm usually backed out to like 1800, so I'll have the carb heat on because I'm outside of the green arc. I'll have the carb heat on, and then once I hit my rotation speed, carb heat, I'll do the power into the green arc, carb heat off. So power is around 2200 RPM or so. And you're still pitching up because now you're climbing and you're in a takeoff configuration and you're just pitching up and you're adding a lot of right rudder. And so I skipped ahead. I slow down, I have the carb heat on. I will lead with the rudder, I'll add right rudder, add some power, turn off the carb heat, pitch up. I start with the rudder. And I've just found that usually, like if I don't start with the rudder and then I pitch up and I add power and then I add the rudder, I find that entering it that way, I enter it uncoordinated and then I have to add the rudder when I'm already in a nose high attitude, and then the nose wants to swing over to here and I lose that plus or minus 10 on the heading. And I've just, in my experience, when I add the rudder first and then add the power, it stays coordinated the whole time. So I lead with the rudder and then power. Same thing happens, the same reaction. Stall horn's gonna go off, the plane's gonna buff it, controls are gonna be kind of ineffective, except for the rudder's still working. Aileron's not really at all. Same recovery. Shake, stall, nose will drop even though you're back here. Nose is gonna drop, you're gonna push forward, add a little bit more power because you're probably not at full power, add a little bit more power, make sure the carb heat's off, let the nose gradually climb back up until VX or VY. Once the VSI says 0 or climbing, you have recovery. So recovery is easy with the power on stall because you don't have to worry about flaps. The setup's a little bit harder because it needs a lot more right rudder maybe than you're anticipating, and you're a little bit more vulnerable to spinning. Steep turns. Do you guys know what steep turns are? 45. Yeah, so 45 degrees. Cameron, I'm assuming you've done them. How do you do them?
Well, you do your crack checklist.
Okay.
So, do your clearing turns,
Mhm.
and then reference point. You do kind of need one for these, and then because for the stalls, like it's good to have like a place to line up, but you actually you don't technically need it. You just need to know.
You do need your
your
reference
heading.
point.
You just need to know,
Mhm.
but you actually need like a good reference point, and then airspeed. You just have to be at your maneuvering speed, and then altitude. You do have to.
Yeah, whatever altitude
You have
you're
to
at.
verbalize an altitude, and then configuration is cruise. Yes.
Yeah.
Cruise, and so then you kind of just like level yourself out, and then you pick a side that you want to go to, and then you turn about 45, and you have to make sure that your nose wants to go. It wants to go down, so you have to make sure. Usually, I'll get into 30 degrees and then do like a swipe and a half of trim,
Okay.
nose up, and then kind of just like you have to keep the skyline like halfway up the cowling, like kind of split the horizon, and then go all the way around, but level out a little bit sooner than you think you have to, because what's it called, like precession, is that what it's called, where
Yeah.
it kind of just keeps turning on the compass, so then
Just lags behind.
yeah. And then you have to anticipate that you have to go right into your next one, and then know that you have that trim in, so kind of either take some out or put more in. Usually take some out to go back the other way, and then you just go all the way back around, and then level yourself out and take the trim out.
Yep. Yeah, that's great. I like that you mentioned rolling out early, for sure. You want to start your rollout like 20 degrees or so prior to whatever your reference point was. Ideally, you have a landmark or something that you're staring at that you're gonna roll back out on, like Mount Diablo or like the Buttes or something. So usually, what I do is if this is my reference point, this tripod, and I know I'm gonna roll to the left first, I'm gonna pick another landmark or something outside that's maybe 10, 15, 20 degrees or so early. So that way, when I'm in the turn, I know, like when I see Sandra, that's when I start to roll out. So when I see that landmark, that's when I start my rollout, and then I'm rolling out facing this again. And then opposite, I'll find something over here. That way when I turn to the right, when I hit that point, I start the rollout, and then I end up on my point here. I also like that you mentioned that your sight picture, if you're like going to the left, for example, it looks like the nose is kind of slicing through the horizon. So maybe what it'll look like is you will have, it's like if you see the nose of the airplane, here's the nose and the horizon's like right here, and you're just like riding the horizon like that. It'll look different depending on, honestly, like how tall you are, what seat you're sitting in. So like your CFI, the sight picture will be different for them than for you. So usually what I'll do is I'll do a steep turn, hopefully a good one, and then I'll let the student be like, I'll ask the student, what do you see? Like, where's the nose in reference to the horizon? They'll be like, oh, the nose is like the horizon's like halfway up the nose. I'm like, okay, that's 45 degrees of bank. That's what you should look for. Then we go to the other side. I'm like, now where's the nose in reference to the horizon? They're like, oh, the nose is like on top of the horizon. Okay, as if we're not planning on descending and I'm in a 45-degree bank, this is the sight picture that you should look for. Sight picture is big. I found with steep turns, a big error that is common, that is students are fixated on the attitude indicator, because the attitude indicator is telling you exactly what angle of bank you're in. So naturally you want to look at that because you're like, well, this is keeping me at 45 degrees. But what ends up happening is you fixate on the attitude indicator and you don't realize that you're descending or climbing. And then you have to go to the VSI and you're like, oh shoot, I'm climbing and descending, and then you lose that angle of bank. If you stare outside and you keep that sight picture the same the whole time, then you're good. You're going to maintain that altitude. You're going to maintain the correct angle of bank. Now your main job is to just worry about rolling out on your heading, so a little early. And then, as you said, Cameron, if you added nose up trim, you need to remember to take that back out. Because otherwise, that nose up trim kept the nose from falling in a turn. But once you're straight and level again, now you have all of that vertical lift, but that nose up trim, nose is going to balloon if you don't correct. Another technique is just adding more power. I teach it both ways. I'm like, if you want, because some people are like super savvy with the trim, so I'm like, use the trim in your turn. I personally don't use the trim, I just add some power. So like I will, do the crack, find a heading or a reference point. I'll get into 30 degrees of bank, and I pause here. When I say pause here, I mean I'm at 30 degrees for like a second. So at 30 degrees, I add power, I pull. And when I say add power, I went into this around 2300 RPM. I added power at about 2500 RPM, so about 200 RPM. Add 200 RPM, pull back, get into 45. And then holding 45, holding the side picture, finding my rollout point, roll out to where now I'm back on my heading. And then I have to, as you start rolling out, you also have to back out the power. Same concept with the trim. Take out the extra trim, take out the extra power. Otherwise, the nose will balloon back up. Common mistakes, other than fixating on the attitude indicator, rolling out like on your point. When I say that, I mean like you start your rollout on your point and then you end up over here or over here. So finding that kind of middle ground. Not adding enough power, not adding enough back trim, or forgetting to take it out and then ballooning. Because then when you level out, suddenly you balloon up and then you bust the plus or minus 100 feet that you were given for the steep turn. Not getting into a steep enough turn. Steep turns kind of make some people nervous. So they get into 30 and that's their comfort zone, and then they don't realize like you did 30 the entire time. And you have to be plus or minus 5 or 10. I want to say 5. I don't remember. Oh, disconnected from the internet. Okay. I know for commercial it's plus or minus 5. I don't remember for private pilot if it's plus or minus 5 or 10. All of this is in the ACS. That's all I'm looking at. It's page 36. Plus or minus 5 degrees of bank, airspeed plus or minus 10. So that's your starting airspeed. If you started at 90 miles per hour, when you roll out and take out that extra power or take out that extra trim, you should be level at around 90 miles per hour. Roll out on your entry heading to plus or minus 10 degrees. Do not exceed maneuvering speed. And it's a full 360 degree turn at 45 degrees of bank. You level off, take out that extra trim, extra power, establish your heading, then you get into the next one. Right side needs a lot more right rudder because of those left turning tendencies. So the right side common air is just doing it uncoordinated. So you have to keep coordinated during the turn. When you go to the left, you probably don't need really any rudder, but to the right, you definitely need more right rudder, especially when you exceed about 20 degrees of bank. Then that ball really swings out and you need to step on it and keep it coordinated. Some dangers of steep turns are stalling. You could stall, it's called an accelerated stall. You're doing a steep turn, maybe you don't add enough power. Your airspeed's bleeding off because you're in a turn, so you're pulling back because you want to keep that nose up. But if you pull back in a turn, you have an increased load factor, therefore increased stall speed. You could stall at like 70 miles per hour versus the normal 48 miles per hour. So you might hit 70, you're gonna hear the horn. All you do is get out of the bank. You just stop the maneuver, get out of the bank, roll out of it, the horn will go off, and then, you try it again, do it again, but this time add power. So that being said, also make sure you're entering at or above maneuvering speed, but not too slow, because that's the other danger, is if you try to roll into this steep turn at 70 miles per hour, you're really going to lose that airspeed quickly as soon as you get into 45 degrees of bank. So at least enter it at like 85 miles per hour in the Cessna. In the Piper, I would say like 90, 95 miles per hour, and a 172, 90, 95 knots. So that's the other danger. You can be at or below maneuvering speed. It's a very vague speed that they're giving you. You want to also have that buffer above stall. is your load factor increases exponentially. So the more you bank, the worse it gets. You know, your load factor, like, it doesn't increase. It doesn't do this. It does this. So once you're at 45 degrees of bank, you're pulling 1.5 Gs. Once you're at 60 degrees of bank, you're at 2 Gs. It just jumps right up to 2. Overbanking tendency, I feel like, is also another concept that's overlooked with steep turns, because what overbanking tendency is the fact that when you're in a turn, this wing has a wider travel radius than this wing. Has like a little baby circle it has to make. This one has to travel faster. So this one travels faster, more speed equals more airflow equals more lift. So this wing wants to continue lifting up. So when you get in that 45, it might want to continue going into 60. So you, not only do you have to get into 45, but you have to keep it there. You have to keep it there, not let it exceed the ±5, but also you don't want it to go down to 30. I tend to see students either do one of two things. They either refuse to get into 45 and they only do 30, or I have students who are super comfortable with steep turns, but then they forget over banking tendency and they get into 60 degrees. And then you're not expecting that and you start like descending pretty rapidly. Questions? Then you have ground reference maneuvers for private pilot. Those are really just building blocks for the traffic pattern. I don't have a whole lot to say on those. You have rectangular course, you have turns around a point, you have S turns. These are really just trying to teach you wind awareness, know where the wind's coming from, and correcting for it. So you have turns around a point in S turns where you're trying to maintain a constant radius. In an S turn, it's basically a half circle. So if you have like a road that you're doing S turns around, you're just doing one half circle here and then one half circle. Oh, that was like not to scale at all. Oh my god. Straight level. Okay, pretend these are equal. And then, I don't know, if you have like a tree for your turn around a point, you enter on a downwind, and you maintain a constant radius around the tree, pretend that's equal. And then you have rectangular course, which is essentially traffic patterns, so I'm not gonna try. It's what it sounds like. You're making like a rectangle with rounded corners, you know, just like a traffic pattern. When you fly traffic patterns, you are flying rectangular course. So with both of these, turns around a point and S turns, you're just maintaining a constant radius. This is a full circle, this is a half circle. So you want these to both be equal distances from the road that you've selected. For turns around a point, you want just like a solid point. It could be a tree, it could be an intersection of a road. If you go to the practice area west of Lincoln, it's a lot of fields. So normally I just have students try to find like fields that are kind of just lined up and they all have like dividing lines. What are those called? Sectional lines? And I'll be like, do turns around a point around this intersection. Because sometimes people fixate on like finding the perfect point to turn around and then they like forget how to do the maneuver because they're so focused on finding like a palm tree by itself. And I'm like, dude, just use the road, it's fine. Don't use the house. I have people try to do that too. They're like, I'm gonna do it over that lady's house. I'm like, that lady's gonna report us to the police. Don't do that. Because you're doing these maneuvers between 600 and 1,000 feet AGL. So you're not very high. But what they're setting you up for is the traffic pattern, because you're between those altitudes in a traffic pattern. You're only about 1,000 feet above the ground in most traffic patterns. Some are lower. I think Rio Linda, which is just west of McClellan, their traffic pattern's only 800 feet AGL. So you're even lower over there. So you're just trying to figure out where's the wind coming from. If it's coming from down here and you're doing an S turn, it's going to push you away from the road. So you need a steeper turn on this side. And then the opposite on this side. Now it's pushing you too close to the road, so you need a shallower turn on this side. And then for your turns around a point, you want to enter on a downwind, and if you're entering on a downwind, the wind's like coming from down here, doesn't do much to you when you're in this turn and you're in a constant bank. So whether it's 5-degree bank or 30-degree bank, you're in a bank this entire time. That's why it's a circle. You're at your fastest turn here, and because you're at a faster ground speed, we're talking about ground speed, turn rate, and turn radius with ground reference maneuvers. Faster ground speed equals you need a greater rate of turn in order to maintain that constant radius. So if you're at 80 knots or 80 miles per hour ground speed, you might need a 20-degree turn to maintain that radius. But if you're at a 90 mile per hour ground speed, you might need a 30-degree bank to maintain that same radius. Just like when you're in a car and you're like doing like an on-ramp onto a freeway, you gotta slow down to like 25 miles per hour in order to make that turn, because it's a sharper turn. Same kind of concept in an airplane. If you wanted a shallower bank to maintain that radius, you need to slow down, or you need to increase your bank. So we're in a car, but we're like 3D. Not only can we slow down, but we can also just bank even more. In a car, you can really only turn so much. So you're correcting for the wind based on like how fast am I going? Is it pushing me further away from my point or closer to my point? And all of this is to prepare you for the traffic pattern so that when you're on a downwind, you know if the wind's pushing you closer to the runway or away from the runway. If it's pushing you away from the runway, if it's coming from the tripod, I have to crab. So this is what these maneuvers are for, to teach you how to use a crab to your advantage, how to point the nose into the wind to prevent it from blowing you away or towards your point, which is the runway, realistically. So it's okay, and now I know, because I did all of this, I know that the wind's coming from here, I can turn this way and I can still fly straight, even though I'm pointing sideways, or vice versa. And then in the traffic pattern, a lot of the time, when you're going to a runway and the winds are a crosswind, no matter what runway you're choosing, you want to choose the runway that does not give you a tailwind on the base leg. So if you're flying, so if you're, we're at McClellan, here's 1-6, here's 3-4, wind's coming from here. So wind's coming from the west, it's a crosswind no matter what one you choose. And I will say McClellan's preferred runway is 1-6, so, and it's towered right now, so if it's a crosswind from here, when you turn base leg, you're gonna have a tailwind. Okay, well, you just kind of gotta play with the cards you've been dealt, because tower's gonna probably tell you to land on 1-6. Of course, if you feel unsafe, you can always request 3-4 due to the tailwind on the base leg. However, in a perfect world, you would have the choice where it's like, okay, so, you know what, this is a bad example because it's a right pattern for 1-6, is normally it's left and left, so this is actually a bad example, because you're gonna have a tailwind either way. So let's just pretend that 1-6 has a left traffic pattern. You're at a different airport now. So normally, you would have a left traffic pattern for 3-4, and then a left traffic pattern for the other runway. So we'll say 1-6. We're not at McClellan, we're somewhere else. So if you get a crosswind coming from the west, when you turn base, that wind's now behind you on the base leg for 3-4. So now you have tailwind on 3-4. It might push you all the way over here, and this is that whole stall spin situation where it's like, I overshot final, let me increase my bank angle to like 45 degrees and let me pull up and be too slow, and then stall spin crash. That's that example. Or you can do the base leg where, yeah, it's a crosswind from the left, so you're crabbing this way on the downwind. But once you turn base leg, now it's a headwind. Now you have a little bit more time on the base leg, which is nice. Because you have more time to configure, to set up, to look for the runway, and to figure it out. Whereas if you're blazing through the base leg, you get unstable really fast. So if you come across a runway, a normal runway with 2 left traffic patterns, choose the runway where you don't have a tailwind on the base leg. Over on McClellan, it's like, you're gonna have a tailwind on the base leg either way because it's a right traffic pattern, so they put you on the same side of the airport. So this doesn't really help in that situation. And that's where your crosswind component personal minimums come in. So not only do you have to consider how much crosswind am I comfortable with takeoff and landing, you also have to take into account that it's also a tailwind at some point in your traffic pattern. Like how comfortable are you with a 10 knot tailwind on your base leg? And then a 10 knot crosswind when you're landing and taking off. Probably not super comfortable. So factor that into your crosswind thoughts as well, as like, well, at some point in the pattern, that crosswind becomes a tailwind on the base leg. So either prepare for it if you're confident, comfortable, and proficient with crosswind landings, or don't fly that day. This is what ground reference maneuvers are for, is for you to be able to figure out how to handle a crosswind, how to set up and configure for a crosswind. You'll hear this a lot, but if it's a gusty day, not necessarily has to be like a crosswind, but if it's just a gusty day, if it's super bumpy, you want to fly a faster approach speed than normal, and you'll hear it add half the gust factor. So if the wind is reporting 160 at 10, peak gust is 20. So the wind speeds up to 20 knots for a period, I think it's like of 20 seconds or more. So on average, the wind speeds at 10, but sometimes it speeds up to 20 for a long period of time. So you would take the gust factor, which is the gust minus the velocity. So 20 minus 10, you have a gust factor of 10. Add at least 5 of that to your final approach speed. So if you normally approach at 60 miles per hour, you would have to convert because the wind is in knots. So let's say you're at 60 knots, you would now fly at 65 knots. My CFI, he always told me, just add the whole thing. Add the whole gust factor. Which, you can't really go wrong 90% of the time being faster on landing. Obviously, if it's a short runway, that's different, or if it's a narrow runway, that's different, then yes, being too fast could be a big problem. McClellan, not so much. I'm not worried about being too fast. I've got 10,600 feet of runway, so I'm not super worried. But at least add half, because that's the rule of thumb. My CFI was just, I don't know, he made his own rules. So add at least half of it. So whatever the gust is minus the normal velocity, 20 minus 10, 10 knot gust factor, add 5 to your speeds. That might mean you land with power. That might mean you use less flaps. That's fine. So like a no flap landing even could be the technique. So you don't land with no flaps at all. I would practice no flap landings with your CFI because those are useful. And also if you have an electrical failure, you don't have flaps anyway. So might as well prepare for everything. Or if you normally land with 30 degrees of flaps or 40 degrees of flaps, try landing with only 10. Get used to landing a little faster, so that way in a crosswind situation or a gusty situation, why we want you to be faster is because you have more authority over the plane. Because with slow flight, remember we talked about, when you're slower, you have less control authority because the surfaces aren't very effective because they have less airspeed and airflow. When you're faster, you have more airflow, the controls do more. So if you're trying to correct for a gusty wind or a crosswind, you're not gonna have to do as much because you're faster now. So the controls are a little bit more effective and you can get that crosswind correction in.
Do you always enter a traffic pattern? Like you have to?
No.
I'm just thinking back to my discovery flight and I'm like,
Not really, no. You don't have to. It's like, you know, everyone should default to traffic pattern because it's just like a standard procedure for us all to follow. But no, you don't have to. Like, especially at McClellan, a lot of people just do a straight in for like 1.6. Yeah, like straight ins at McClellan are super common. If you go to like Auburn, straight ins are like not common at all. So sometimes it kind of depends on the airport's culture. So like Auburn, straight in, absolutely not. Everyone will hate you. McClellan, you can get away with it because we have a lot of jet traffic, and so we all kind of just do straight in sometimes. So you can do, no, you don't have to enter per se. It's probably the safest thing to do for the most part because it's more predictable that way. Yeah. And if you have people already in the traffic pattern, like coming in on a straight in could be like rude. But again, McClellan is just like everyone does straight in, so
we just follow the traffic that was already going straight.
Exactly. So like part of it's like, well, what's everyone else doing? Okay, they're all doing straight ins. I guess I'll do a straight in. So it's kind of frustrating because like when it's not towered, it's like, well, what do I do? Well, what is everyone else doing? Kind of thing. What's nice is we are towered, so like towers gonna tell you what to do. I'll tell you now, like if you're coming in from the east, like if this is Folsom Lake and you're coming from Folsom Lake, you're coming into McClellan, they'll probably have you enter on a base and then final. So like you're doing half of the traffic pattern in that case. But if you're coming from the north, whether it's north, northwest, or northeast, they're for sure gonna put you on a straight in. If you're coming from the west, southwest, they'll just be like, enter on a downwind. That's towered though, so it's a little bit easier. If you're non-towered, that's when you refer to Advisor Circular 9066 Charlie for the recommended. Of course, they recommend do a traffic pattern, but again, airport culture plays a factor too.
We always did that traffic pattern in Nut Tree.
Yeah, like Nut Tree's non-towered, so like that makes sense, and it's a popular, I mean, there's some flight training going on over there, so they for sure don't really want you to do straight ins. Also, you guys have a lot of hills, so I feel like a straight in's kind of hard. Auburn, yeah, you do try to go straight in, everybody will like throw rocks at you. You don't do that there. Lincoln, you can do it if it's not too busy. Yeah, just airports.
I just didn't think of it until just now, and I'm like, wait.
You're like, I don't think we did the train. Yeah, no, McClellan's
because I just flew straight in. I was like, oh my God.
There you go. Yeah, McClellan straight ins are super common. But yeah, I just really wanted to go over some maneuvers, and like because you could be asked about the aerodynamics behind them, things that you're supposed to consider, concerns. For most of them, like load factor is always there, left turning tendencies, overbanking tendency for steep turns, stall spin awareness, angle of attack, knowing when you're going to stall. That's usually a big question. It's like, when does this airplane stall? Well, stalls when it exceeds the critical angle of attack. That's the answer. We're not talking about stall speeds. We're not talking about how heavy you are. It's when it exceeds the critical angle of attack. They could ask a question where it's like, well, if you're flying at max gross weight one day and then you're flying at only 1,400 pounds the other day, what does that do to your stall speed? Well, if I increase my weight, I have a faster stall speed. If I decrease my weight, I have a slower stall speed. The POH only gives you stall speeds for max gross weight, so we use those. But just knowing those relationships is going to be necessary. Knowing that if you increase load factor, what increases load factor? Increasing your bank angle. If you increase load factor, you also increase stall speed. Maneuvering speed also changes with weight. So our maneuvering speed is based off of max gross weight, so 1,600 pounds in the 150. It slows down if you're lighter than that. By how much, I don't know. POH doesn't give you that number. I think there is a formula for it that I would have to like dig around and find. But otherwise, we use that maneuvering speed because if anything, it's like, yeah, the maneuvering speed's technically slower. So maybe like if you're at 1,400 pounds, I would slow it down. Like if it's 109 miles per hour in the 150, maybe I would just use 100 miles per hour. But I don't know the exact speed. I would just know that it'd be lower. But just knowing that relationship is what you're going to be expected to know. And doing these maneuvers, you're expected to do them safely, within standards, and also understanding like why you have to do them. Ground reference maneuvers for traffic patterns. Slow flight, because you're landing in slow flight. Power off, power on stalls, traffic pattern, you're most likely to enter a stall in that situation. So you want to know how to recover and how also, really importantly, how to prevent it from even happening and being aware of those warning signs. Steep turns, the textbook answer is like, oh, if you're in a box canyon and you need to turn around and avoid hitting something, you can do a steep turn. That is true. How many of you are going to go fly in a box canyon? I don't know. Right? Yeah, to avoid an obstacle, to avoid somebody flying at you. So it's kind of like an evasive maneuver. However, what I like to look at with steep turns is for students, for me, it demonstrates that the student can do it well. It demonstrates that the student understands the aerodynamic behaviors of the plane. It demonstrates that they have a quick scan of the instruments and an understanding of the instruments and what they're telling them. So they're able to read the instruments and interpret them quickly and then keep their eyes outside. That's what steep turns are for me. And it's not a wrong answer, but the textbook's gonna be like box canyon. That's usually like what it says. And it's not wrong, but that's just an example. Yeah, that's all the maneuvers for Private Pilot. And then the next time you guys have to learn new maneuvers would be for your commercial certificate. There's no maneuvers in instrument training, it's just all instrument approaches and procedures and such. Commercial, there's different maneuvers for commercial that you'll have to get into. And you'll have to understand the aerodynamics behind those as well. But by then, if you guys pursue your commercial, you'll already have more knowledge at that point anyway. So things will make a lot more sense. But for now, you're learning the foundation. So those are all the maneuvers. Any questions on those? Okay. Maneuvers, you'll start doing those before you land most of the time. I don't know. There are some instructors that are like, I get them right into takeoffs and landings, and I'm like, interesting. Usually you do the building blocks first, which are the maneuvers, and then you get into takeoffs and landings. You're already in cross-country stuff, so you're probably not doing a whole lot of maneuvers training right now. The next time you'll do them is like before your check ride. So before your check ride, you'll revisit all the maneuvers, make sure like they're fresh back in your mind, and then proceed on. But yeah, right now you're doing cross-country stuff, which is like the fun stuff, so that's good. Yeah, questions? Next week is the last class, and we'll just be reviewing everything. It'll be just kind of like, I would like a group discussion. So I'll ask questions, you guys will discuss with each other, answers, just based off of previous classes, all the notes that you guys have, Sporty's videos that you've watched, and I'll do my best to frame it like how an examiner would frame it, like give you a scenario, or just ask you like not a yes or no question, but a question that you either have to look up or know where to find it, things like that. But it'll just be based off of, I put it in the group chat, like that updated schedule, like all the topics. It'll be like cross country, night operations, emergencies, malfunctions. I probably won't focus too much on maneuvers and like radio communication, but might have something in there. Yeah.
I was curious if there's like a timeline that we have access to the YouTube videos.
I don't think so. I think you should just have them
Like
forever.
like a specialized code thingy. Like we don't have a specialized link, so I didn't think so. But
Right.
I just,
Yeah.
I just-
No, it's just there forever. I don't think they're planning on like revoking access or anything. I personally don't think we should. So like you guys just have access to them for the rest of your life. And it's also just good for review. I would say like especially before check ride, good stuff to review. But yeah, if they try to revoke access, I'll be like, no, don't do that. So. Yeah, you guys should all have access to that. And I went up with Jamie today, and we did steep turns and stalls, and short field and soft field landings in the Piper, and we filmed it, me walking through it and like the steps and such. I think I have to upload it. I will do my best to be fast about it, but I will try to upload it onto the YouTube soon and send you guys that link. That way it kind of goes hand in hand like what we talked about today. We talked about like the ground stuff today, and then we did the flight. I'll do my best to upload that because usually Cicely does it, but she's doing too much. So they were like, "Can you do it?" I was like, "I will try." So yeah, just that's coming up. But yeah, so next week is a review. So just review your notes. Review like maybe like some videos on topics that you were kind of like about. And honestly, like with your sporties, I just feel like you should be going at it like at your own pace. And you should be taking, finish the videos and then do those practice tests. Because you guys have to take a written exam. And that's really, sporties is really for the written exam. It's not necessarily for, obviously it has good information for your Checkride too, but that's most of your written stuff. So in terms of preparing for next week, review the old videos, review your notes. And if I think of anything, other videos or other articles to send you guys, I will do that. But that's all I have. Cool. Well, we made it, you guys. One more class.
Are you guys always just gonna do the private pilot?
I don't know. So